always liked driving. I always felt that the road was the only place where I really felt free. But there is something different in the lonely nights, something that attracts me more and more. The silence of the dawn, the deserted road, without the noise of cities or people. The loneliness that, instead of scaring me, seemed funny to me. When I decided to change my routine, I managed it was just a way to escape the daily stress of day trips. Did not know, in fact, what was waiting for me. It was an ordinary Monday night, or at least it seemed to be. I took my truck and followed the same road as always, but this time I will turn on a different route. The map showed a secondary road that passed through more isolated, quieter areas. Something drew my attention to that path, and I decided to follow. I knew this detour would take me further than usual, further inland in Colorado. There was no reason for me to do that, but something inside of me seemed pushed. The road was empty, as I expected. No cars, no signs of life, only darkness that seemed to swallow everything around. I passed through small towns, some of them partially abandoned, others with dim lights flashing in the houses far away. Nothing strange, nothing I haven't seen before. But there was something unsettling in the air. I could feel a growing tension, as if the simple act of driving there was wrong. However, the sound of the engine and the movement of the truck were comforting. I went on, not knowing that I was approaching something I could not understand. That's when I saw the gas station by the side of the road. It was not much, just an old structure with some flashing lights. The kind of place you would expect to find on any isolated road. I parked the truck and went down, feeling the weight of the night over me. The station was empty, except for another truck parked in one of the bombs, apparently abandoned. The engine was off, and the only thing that indicated someone's presence were the tire marks on the ground. I didn't know what got me there. There was something wrong, but it wasn't a clear feeling. It was more a restlessness in the stomach, a pressure that I could not understand. I went to the shop and pushed the door. The sound of metal against ecological wood or in quietness. Inside, everything was dirty and poorly lit, and the only smell was of burnt cigarette and old coffee. The shelf was full of products stranded, as if no one had bought there for years. The attendant was behind the counter, but did nothing but watch me. Didn't make a word, didn't make any movement. I ignored it. The coffee was hot and strong, the kind of thing you expect when you travel for so long. No hurry. Went to the corner and felt myself, looking out of the window. The road seemed even more distant, almost as if the night was swallowing everything around. I wanted to continue, but something told me to wait a little longer. I took a sip of coffee and then saw, on the wall, something that did not leave me alone. It was a yellowed sheet of paper, a misspelled warning with a crooked letter, glued with tape. What did you say? Something about never stopping at that post at night. Something about the roads around. I do not remember exactly, because the feeling of restlessness grew in me and the words began to lose meaning. Only I know that something inside me opened, as if that simple message was important. Something was very wrong, but I still did not know what. Still, I decided to ignore it. It was just a superstition, right? These kinds of things always come up in isolated places. Nobody stops here at night, I thought, but then the idea seemed absurd to me. Of course someone would stop. I had to rest, continue. Nothing more. I took the coffee and left the post. The night was colder now, and the cold wind cut my skin. When I looked at the truck ahead, something made me hesitate. It was still in the same position, but the engine was not running. It was empty. There was no one on board. Something bothered me about it. The truck seemed out of place. It shouldn't be there, or maybe the post shouldn't be there. I can't tell. I took a deep breath, got in my truck and started the engine. The familiar sound calmed me for a moment, but the feeling of being present did not leave me. I looked in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing. Only the road behind me, dark and silent. But something told me not to follow. Something said I should go back and continue what I was trying to avoid. And then I saw the reflection of the light from the post in the rearview mirror, now much further away. I was going away. I was going where I shouldn't be. And, not knowing why, I knew that it would not be the last time I would pass through there. The road seemed endless. The feeling of discomfort not unpleasant, it only turned into something heavier, more oppressive, as if the air around me had become thicker. The truck's engine mocked softly, but the sound seemed almost muffled by the darkness. I was alone. There was no light ahead, no house, no sign of life. Only the road and me. I looked out the window, trying to see something in the mists, but everything seemed to stretch to infinity. That path narrowed me down, gave the feeling of being swallowed up by night, as if being pulled somewhere I did not want to go. There was no other vehicle nearby. No sound except my truck and the sharp wind. The road, before common, now seemed a maze with no exit. I knew it had been run by everyone before, but something was different. Something about that place seemed familiar, and at the same time strange. Maybe it was the silence, or the feeling of being watched. I felt the night look on me, as if something or someone was waiting for me to make a wrong move. Don't know how long it was, but then in the distance I saw another light. A faint light, blinking as if dying. It was not a car light, nor from some distant house. It was a lower light, more intense. A lighthouse. Something made me want to stop. I should not stop, not in that place, but a curiosity consumed me. I knew something was calling me, and it was almost as if I had no choice. The road seemed to me direction up there. Slow down, and I turned left toward the light. The post seemed even further away now, but this new light was closer. The asphalt became more irregular, and I realized that this road was no longer a regular road. The asphalt was worn, with cracks and holes, signs of abandonment. As if time had stopped in that place, as if the outside world had not arrived there long ago. As I approached the light, I realized that it was not in the middle of the road but in an old building on the side of the road. It looked like a kind of warehouse, an old wooden building with broken windows and iron doors that creaked in the wind. Something in the air, maybe the smell of mold or the sound of wind, made me feel that the place was waiting. But waiting for what? I stopped the truck in front of the building, not knowing what to do. The engine was still zombie, but the rest was quiet. No presence except mine. The light, now more intense, came from within, but it did not move. It was a light. The air was heavy, loaded with the smell of rotting wood and something else, something difficult to identify. The silence was absolute, and the weight of loneliness seemed to me enveloping like a cover. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't just go back. There was a persistent feeling, as if that place called me, as if I was already predestined to be there at that exact moment. When I got out of the truck, the ground was more damp than I had imagined. The cold earth was sticking to my boots as I approached the entrance of the building. The lighthouse that emitted that strong light was hidden somewhere inside the warehouse, a source of light that I could not locate but which seemed to be directed exactly to me. The iron door was half open, varying with each movement of the wind, as if inviting me to enter. My body moved involuntarily, as if it already knew what to do, as if it had been brought there for some kind of purpose. I can't think any clearer. All that remained was the desire to know what was inside that place, what was waiting for me, waiting. When I stepped inside the warehouse, a chill ran through my spine. The air was denser inside. The traces of an ancient dust were everywhere, thick layers that covered the wooden shelves, stacked boxes and objects fallen on the ground. Everything seemed abandoned for decades, but at the same time, the place seemed intact. As if nothing had really changed since the last person had stepped there. I didn't know what to expect, but as I moved more inward, a low sound began to infiltrate the silence. Something soft, a suggestion almost imperceptible, but that was there, spreading like a mist, involving my mind. It was as if someone were talking, but I could not understand what they said. Every step I took, the sound increased, and the light that I had seen before seemed to pull stronger. For some reason, the inspiration didn't scare me. It wasn't the sound itself, but the way it fit into the stillness of the place. Something in it seemed familiar. It was as if I had heard before, or as if he was deep in my memory, trying to respawn. But I can't remember. The feeling of being watched intensified, and then suddenly everything went dark. The light, which was so intense before, went out, and the air, which was charged before, now seemed to have disappeared completely. The feeling that space around me had shrunk became overwhelming. I no longer knew where it was, as if the place was swallowing me. The supposed one, which was once distant, now seemed to be coming from all sides, as if the walls themselves were talking to me. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew I shouldn't be there. A sense of peace, as deep as the silence around me, took hold of me. I will leave. The first thing I felt was the pressure in my lungs. The air, which before seemed thick and stuffy, now became impenetrable, as if the environment had become an invisible prison. I tried to take a deep breath, but the air was so heavy that I couldn't breathe enough. Each attempt made my head spin faster, and the feeling that I was losing control intensified. The whisper continued, louder now, closer, and still, inaccurate. It seemed like one voice, or several, mixed, but never something I could identify clearly. Sometimes the words were aligned, but soon they crumbled into an incomprehensible tangle. I could not understand, but something inside me said that I should do it, understand, listen to the end. My hands, which were tremendously light, stretched out in the dark, groping the air, looking for something that gave me a direction, that told me what to do. There was no more light, the darkness seemed to swallow every little bit of space I occupied. When I finally touched what seemed to be a wall, a cold ran through my fingers, cold and wet, as if I were touching a submerged rock. I backed quickly, frightened by the freezing temperature, but the touch was enough to give me a little direction. I need to move, get out of there. Fear was spreading through my body like an electric current, and every inch I moved seemed to pull me deeper into the unknown. The darkness was absolute, and the suggestions did not stop, even when my feet touched the ground with hasty steps. The feeling of being observed never isolated. In fact, it intensified as I went forward. As if something or someone was there, somewhere in the dark, waiting for me to make a mistake. Every step I took, every move I made, seemed to be calculated. I knew I was not alone. But what worried me most was a growing sense that perhaps I was the intruder there. I tried to remember how I got there. There was something in the warehouse, something that drew me there. I knew that fear was already consuming me, but the impulse to continue, to advance, was greater. It was as if I already knew that I had no choice, that the place controlled me now, that I was part of it in some way. I didn't notice it immediately, but my steps started to drag, as if the weight of the air was forcing me to move more slowly. My legs were getting heavier and heavier, and every movement seemed like the ground below me was widening, extending more and more, like an endless road. And then, in my midst of the darkness, a form began to outline in front. Not a clear figure, but a shadow, a presence that did not exist even before. Something that I could not describe immediately, but that approached slowly, as if it was already reported of my presence. The tension in the air became almost unbearable, and the melody intensified, turning into a kind of call. I didn't know if it was me that was going to that or if it was calling me. I just knew that now, I need to see. I needed to understand what was happening, who or what was there watching me. Fear dominated me, but at the same time there was a strange sense of curiosity, of fascination. And I saw myself walking towards the shadow, unable to stop it, as if something had finally pulled me into this endless abyss. The air was colder, sharp, almost as if the darkness was turning into something tangible, something I could touch and feel on my skin. The shadow in front of me, which until then seemed indefinite, was taking shape. Slowly she materialized into a human figure, but there was something deeply wrong with her, something I could not fully comprehend. It was as if it were disfigured, distorted, a presence that should not exist there. My feet were stuck on the ground, and my mind was crying for me to run away from that place. But for some reason my movements were slow, as if the weight of the darkness itself held me, preventing me from leaving. I smelled something damp and decaying in the air, something that made me want to vomit, but the feeling of being there, in this place, prevented me from doing anything other than watching. The figure approaches with a bewildering calm. His movements were as if time was slowing down, and I could hear the footsteps, like a whisper on the ground, a muffled sound echoing in my ears and multiplying in the darkness. I could not look directly at it. Something inside me said that if I did, something worse would happen. The figure, still indistinct, seemed to have the power to hypnotize me, to control my senses. Then a sound, a word, broke the silence. It wasn't exactly a word, but a deep, guttural sound, as if it was a vibration that came from inside my own mind, and yet it wasn't mine. The suggestion had a force, a weight that seemed to permeate my soul. He called me by name. I was paralyzed. My body did not respond to the command of escape, nor to the desperate desire to scream. The only sound I could get was my own heart racing, a muffled and terrifying sound echoing in my head. And the figure. The figure was closer now. I could feel her presence, not seeing it clearly. It was a physical sensation, as if the air around me was being sucked into his being. The shadow that before seemed a strange figure began to delineate with more light, but I could not get close enough to distinguish its details. I could only see the distorted outline, as if reality itself was bending around it. I wanted to understand, I wanted to see, but something inside me said not to look directly, not to let it reveal itself completely. Every second you passed, the pressure around me increased. The darkness seemed to expand, as if it was swallowing me completely, consuming me, taking me inside something I could not conceive. I was still standing, unable to move, and the whisper intensified, becoming a unique sound, like an endless echo that filled my mind. It was then that I realized the figure was no longer just a shadow. She was talking. Not with words I could understand, but with children, with gestures. A communication of a nature that I did not know how to identify, but which caused me an indescribable terror. What was that? What did I want from myself? I didn't know what else to do. I only knew that I was trapped, that the darkness completely enveloped me and that, every second, the presence of the figure became stronger, closer. Something inside me said that I was losing my identity, my notion of who I was. Something was changing, consuming me. And I didn't know what else could happen, but I felt in my soul that I couldn't escape. I did not know how long it had been there, without movement, without event. Time seemed to have diluted itself in the space of an eternal instant. The figure in front of me, now more defined, was no longer an indistinct shadow. It was, I could not describe, something human, but at the same time monstrous. Their forms were broken, deconstructed, as if they were made of pieces of darkness, fragments of nightmares. There was a presence of something much older than anything I could imagine. Something that does not belong to this world. I wanted to run, but my mind was no longer in tune with what my body wanted to do. The panic took hold of me so intensely that I could barely understand my own thoughts. It was as if all rationality had been ripped from me, derived from an uncontrollable sense of terror. And then, I heard the inspiration again. It was as if I were inside my own mind, as if the voice did not come from outside, but from something deeper, that I could no longer distinguish from myself. The sound was louder now, clearer, and I realized it wasn't a word. It was a sentence, something that my mind should not understand, but that somehow was being transmitted to me, absorbed without I could avoid. You are beyond any elevation. The phrase reverberated inside me, taking over every cell of my body. I didn't know what I did, but I felt something inside me breaking with every syllable that formed in the darkness. I wanted to understand, but at the same time, I did not. There was something in my heart, something primal, that screamed for me to shut up, so I would not seek more answers. The eyes of the figure. I didn't know how to describe them. They didn't have eyes like ours. They were there, but they weren't. His eyes covered the light, as if all the darkness around them were concentrated in that deep emptiness. They looked at me, but at the same time, they did not forgive me for seeing. It was as if I were insignificant, just another presence in the vast darkness they ruled. I was nothing. And with each look, with each movement of the figure, the environment around me seemed to close, as if reality itself was being drained from me. I could feel the floor below me crumbling, the walls of the house disappearing, and I was being sucked into that void, into that endless hole. I forced myself to look at the feet of the figure, looking for something, anything that would help me understand what was happening. But there was nothing there. No base, no ground, just an exception to reality. It was as if the world around me was beginning to crumble, and I, at the center of it all, was a helpless victim of a force that I did not understand. The whisper, louder now, took over my mind. I knew it was useless to resist, but something inside me still struggled to understand, to find a logical reason, an explanation for all that. But there was no explanation. There was no logic. You are already with me, the voice said, once again, in my interior. I didn't understand what it wanted, but I knew I couldn't go back. I was there, in a place that was not a place, lost in a darkness that should not exist. My mind began to give way, to be fragmented with the presence of that figure, as if it was absorbed by her. I was beyond reason. And deep down, I knew there was no way out. Woke up. But it was not a common awakening. There was no sense of interruption that normally accompanies the awakening from a nightmare. It was as if it were the reality in which I was no longer mine. As if, by opening my eyes, I had entered a world that did not belong to me, but which was now part of me in a way that I did not understand. The house was quiet, quieter than ever. There was something in the air, something palpable, as if I were in a suspended space between two realities. I looked around and I saw lying on the cold floor of the room, the space around me unchanged but at the same time no longer familiar. The shadows danced on the walls, but they were not like the shadows I knew. They must be alive, move on their own, as if they need a will of their own. I wanted to get up, but my body seemed heavy, my spirit still stuck somewhere I couldn't reach. The voice that tormented me, was still there. Now, clearer, closer, almost inside of me. It was no longer a whisper. It was a firm presence, with a tone that reverberated in the depths of my mind. You are still here. But it is not what it was. There is no return. I didn't know what it was doing. My mind was clouded, unable to focus. My body seemed to have been torn from itself, as if something had entered into me and occupied my space. I tried to take a deep breath, trying to understand, trying to reconnect with what I knew, but there was nothing familiar. What I saw around me was no longer the house that I called home. The walls were distorted, the furniture in wrong places, everything seemed to float in a thick fog, with contours that disintegrate and formed before my eyes. As if the place was crumbling, falling apart into pieces that did not fit. The figure was there, but no longer before me. It was now inside of me, a part of me that I could not distinguish anymore. The emptiness I felt was not only external, but internal. I had no more control, neither about what I saw nor about what I felt. The mind seemed to be in a cycle, trying to understand something that could not be understood, looking for an exit where there were no doors. Each thought was an empty echo, a reflection of something that no longer had meaning. I knew with painful clarity that I was no longer me. I had lost myself, somehow, in a game without rules, in a reality that no longer made sense. I looked in the mirror, hoping to see my reflection, but what I saw was a distorted image, like a caricature of myself. The man I knew was there, but there was something in his eyes that wasn't mine. It was as if he was looking at me, not as an image, but as a shadow that fled from its own existence. There is no more you. There is none of us. I tried to speak, I tried to scream, but the voice I didn't hear was mine. She echoed in the room as an answer to a question that was never asked. And then everything fell apart. The emptiness took me completely. I no longer knew where I was, nor who I was. Everything had disappeared, leaving behind only a feeling that I had been consumed by something that was not of this world, something that had swallowed me whole. And finally the silence fell. I don't know if what happened was an end. I don't know if there is anything after that. All I know is that I'm not me anymore. I am only the echo of a presence that should never have existed.